recently sold the house for $500,000 and plan to take a trip with my mistress. The news caught me off guard when Edward, in appropriately cheerful tone, informed me over the phone that he sold the house for the same amount. I couldn't comprehend the situation. That house was a sentimental inheritance from my father. Shockingly, Edward proudly revealed he has a mistress. This revelation is not only baffling but also maddening. How can he casually sell the house, the dear house passed down from my dad, and boldly declare he has a mistress? What about Amy? When I questioned him about our daughter, Edward callously dismissed any concern, claiming she's been a nuisance, and he has no qualms about leaving her behind. Hearing him speak so callously about our flesh and blood is infuriating. I am Betty Sandra, a 41-year-old homemaker, and my life with my husband Edward and our 12-year-old daughter Amy is far from harmonious. Our marriage has been strained for quite some time, and suspicions of Edward's infidelity have lingered for about a year. Despite lacking concrete proof, Edward's changed behavior, frequent post-work outings, and suspicious gifts to an unknown recipient fuel my suspicions. I'm hesitant to confront him about an affair without solid evidence, and my fear has paralyzed me from taking any decisive action. Reflecting on the past, the Edward I met and fell in love with a decade ago seems like a distant memory. His kindness and sincerity initially drew me in, leading to a proposal on our first anniversary and subsequent marriage. However, the blissful image of our family began to crumble around the time Amy turned 1. As she grew more active, parenting became increasingly challenging. As a full-time homemaker, I juggled the responsibilities, seeking Edward's assistance with baths and meals after his workday. Initially cooperative, Edward's willingness to participate waned over time, leaving me to wonder why he deemed parenting solely my responsibility as a stay-at-home mom. In my quest to salvage what remains of our family, the shocking revelation of Edward's impulsive decision to sell our cherished home and abandon us in pursuit of his newfound happiness with a mistress has left me both angry and distraught. I must find a way to intervene and prevent Edward from hastily disposing of our shared history. After unleashing a barrage of complaints, Edward abruptly retreated to the bedroom, leaving me and Amy alone in the living room. I grappled with the challenge of dealing with Amy's tantrums, attempting to get her into pajamas without triggering a meltdown. The sting of Edward's earlier harsh words lingered as I navigated through this difficult moment. Following his outburst, Edward withdrew from any interaction with Amy, even refusing her pleas to play on his days off, dismissively claiming that playing is my job as a mom, citing his purported busyness. Amy, innocently seeking her father's attention, faced callous rejection. Edward, preoccupied with his horse racing magazine, showed little concern for Amy's feelings. When she cried out, his scolding was unforgiving, questioning my competence as a stay-at-home mom. To shield Amy from his verbal abuse, we sought refuge in our room, finding solace in moments of just the two of us. While I yearned for moments to indulge in personal hobbies, living with Amy around the clock left me with little time for myself. Unjustly, Edward enjoyed his horse racing hobby, while I bore the brunt of his verbal assaults. Despite the unfairness, I refrained from complaining, acknowledging our dependence on Edward's income for Amy's well-being. Frustration and self-blame intensified as I grappled with my perceived helplessness in the situation. 11 years passed since then, and Amy, now 12, continued to endure Edward's abusive language. The kind and caring Edward I knew before marriage seemed to have disappeared. I navigated this tumultuous existence, careful not to provoke him, solely to provide for Amy. One day, as Amy and I engaged in drawing together, she expressed admiration for my talent, suggesting I pursue it as a job. Despite once aspiring to be a cartoonist, I had abandoned the dream, continuing to draw as a hobby. Amy's encouragement and praise brought a sense of pride and confidence, momentarily overshadowing the challenges posed by Edward's cantankerous nature. Despite Edward's disruptive behavior, Amy blossomed into an honest and straightforward individual with a sunny disposition. Her compliment on my drawing served as a source of joy and motivation. As long as Amy could smile, I found the strength to persevere in this challenging life. That night, as Edward stumbled home in a drunken state, I sighed, increasingly concerned about his escalating alcohol consumption. I carefully removed the jacket from Edward's slouched form, checking his pockets. To my surprise, a piece of paper fell out, a receipt from a motel. This tangible evidence confirmed my suspicions of infidelity, which had been lingering vaguely until now. Quietly concealing the incriminating receipt on a shelf, I contemplated how to confront Edward. The next morning, with Edward not entirely sober, I seized the opportunity after Amy had gone to school. Engaging in routine household chores, the receipt from the previous day occupied my thoughts. While I had chosen not to confront Edward without evidence, having concrete proof now made it challenging to ignore the facade of our masked couple. I desired a confession and an apology from him within a week, maybe even a few days. But how? Lost in thought, my smartphone buzzed unexpectedly. Glancing at the unfamiliar number, a sense of apprehension overcame me as I answered. The caller identified themselves as from General Hospital, delivering news about Edward. Rushed there by ambulance, he was undergoing surgery for a kidney disease, with a high risk of kidney failure and the need for a transplant. Overwhelmed by the sudden revelation, the doctor assured me that a kidney transplant was possible if a compatible donor was found quickly. While Edward's behavior had been hurtful, I couldn't fathom wishing for him to lose his life. That night, I pondered the transplant surgery, contemplating the possibility of saving Edward's life. Weeks passed, and the results of potential kidney transplant candidates within the family were revealed. Surprisingly, I turned out to be the best match. Edward's parents, though alive, were unfit for surgery due to poor health. As an only child with a compatible blood type, I emerged as the most suitable donor. Despite hesitations, the value of Edward's life outweighed any reservations, prompting me to proceed with being the donor for his kidney transplant. When I explained Edward's medical condition and our impending transplant to Amy, she offered her blessing, encouraging me to do my best. During my hospitalization, Amy stayed with my in-laws, who despite their health issues welcomed her. Grateful for her understanding, I found solace in the fact that Amy was a supportive and understanding child. With this reassurance, I embarked on the journey of donating a kidney to save Edward's life. A week after signing the consent forms and completing the necessary health checks, I underwent kidney transplant surgery for Edward. The procedure, surprisingly swift, led to a hospital stay of about a week for me and 11 days for Edward. Fortunately, there were no complications, and both of us experienced a smooth recovery. As the day of my discharge approached, I received an unexpected call on my phone. Answering the call with curiosity, I recognized the voice on the other end. It was Edward. Anticipating words of gratitude for becoming a donor, I asked about his post-surgery condition. However, his response was entirely unexpected. Edward, pausing for a breath, shifted the conversation abruptly to our house. He casually informed me that he had sold our house for $500,000 and planned to embark on a trip with his mistress. The news struck me like a thunderbolt, and I couldn't comprehend his inappropriately cheerful tone. The house he claimed to have sold was the cherished inheritance from my father, and his brazen admission of having a mistress was nothing short of insane. Outraged, I questioned the fate of Amy, to which Edward callously replied that he didn't care, dismissing her as a nuisance he was leaving behind. The shock of learning about the sale of our house and Edward's intention to run off with his mistress left me angry and on the verge of losing my sanity. Determined to intervene, I couldn't accept him hastily disposing of the house without proper consideration. Edward abruptly ended the call, leaving me in turmoil as I tried to make sense of the situation. The shock exacerbated my condition, leading to a prolonged hospital stay. Distraught and feeling helpless, I contemplated my next steps. The urgency to secure a place for Amy and me became evident without our home. I called Amy, expressing concern about our situation. However, to my surprise, she reassured me with a bright voice, stating that she had taken care of things. Confused by her confident statement, I probed further. Amy explained that Edward had asked his mistress to sell the house, but in reality, her grandparents had intervened. Listening to Amy's detailed account, I was astonished by the unexpected turn of events during my hospitalization. Grateful for Amy's proactive handling of the situation, I felt a mixture of emotions, including surprise and relief. Encouraged by Amy's mature response, a sense of peace finally settled within me. However, if what Amy had revealed was true, I couldn't help but wonder about the current situation with Edward and his mistress. Despite my curiosity, I reminded myself that rest was paramount and allowed myself to drift into sleep. 4 days later, having sufficiently recovered, I was discharged from the hospital and headed to my in-laws' house. "Mom, welcome back!" Amy exclaimed joyfully as she rushed towards me. My mother-in-law wore a gentle smile, expressing her delight at my return. However, my father-in-law wore a grim expression, apologizing for Edward's unbelievable actions. I couldn't fathom how Edward, with such wonderful parents, could turn out so twisted. Taking responsibility, I acknowledged that I should have spoken up sooner. As we sat down, ready to hear their story, my in-laws shared surprising details. Despite the shocking revelation, my mother-in-law reassured me with firm encouragement, asserting that Edward wouldn't have his way. Following the conversation, Amy and I attempted to head home. On the way, though, we encountered a familiar scene: Edward and an unknown woman arguing with a realtor in front of his office. There was no mistaking the confrontation. Edward, disheveled in sweatpants, and the woman, presumably his mistress, engaged in a heated dispute. Edward, visibly angered, was lamenting the cancellation of the house purchase and the loss of his $500,000. Surprised, Amy and I approached them, questioning Edward's presence. "What are you doing here?" I asked, catching Edward off guard. His mistress joined in surprise, accusing me of sabotaging the house sale. Dismissing their baseless claims, I instinctively shielded Amy behind me. Addressing the confused realtor, I clarified my relationship with Edward, stating that I was his wife. The realtor, taken aback, shared the unfortunate consequences of the canceled purchase, highlighting the impact on their plans to board a plane and buy a new house. Edward, pointing at his mistress, blamed her for his financial predicament. It became clear that Edward was attempting to sell the precious house I inherited from my father, to settle debts incurred for his mistress, and purchase a new home for the two of them. Incredibly selfish and disregarding Amy and me, Edward's actions were beyond belief. Overwhelmed with anger, I confronted him. Edward, unfazed, responded arrogantly, claiming that I wouldn't even eat without him. Despite the critical situation, his disrespectful attitude further intensified my indignation. Despite Edward continuing to spew insults, I confronted him, expressing my disbelief that he thought he could sell my precious house without even discussing it with me, the rightful owner. I questioned whether he had forged documents. To my surprise, I learned that the people attempting to buy the house were none other than his own parents. Amy had revealed over the phone, while I was in the hospital, that my in-laws had staged a plan to pretend to buy the house as a strategy to discipline Edward. Amy explained that her grandparents were furious upon learning about Edward's misdeeds. They believed Amy, trusting her inherent brightness and honest nature over their son. Amy disclosed that she had talked to her grandparents about the importance of the house, as it was the one my father had left to me. In response, they pretended to buy it to prevent its hasty sale. Despite Edward's vulgar laughter and desperate remarks, Amy remained unfazed. However, I decided to take a firm stand and presented Edward with divorce papers. His scoffing response implied disbelief that I could live without him, assuming my dependence as a homemaker. Determined to shatter this assumption, I informed Edward that I would be receiving a lifetime gift from his parents. Confused, Edward and his mistress looked bewildered as I recounted my in-laws' wish to give me a part of their assets before it was too late. They expressed gratitude for our daughter and deemed me more important than a son who couldn't even say thank you for an organ donation. Despite Edward's protests and threats to take it to court, I accepted the lifetime gift. Edward's face turned pale, realizing that the assets that should have been his were now going to his soon-to-be ex-wife. In his anger, he vowed to challenge it legally, but I dismissed his shallow thinking. Stepping forward, I closed the distance to Edward, locking eyes with him as I unleashed my final words. I emphasized that the entire mess was a consequence of his belittling, infidelity, and irresponsible spending. I questioned his ability to afford legal proceedings and reminded him of his past betrayals. Furious up close, Edward, visibly shaken, squeaked out his protests. I regretfully won't pursue legal action. Please find it in your heart to forgive me. Despite his desperate apologies, it was too late. I cast a stern gaze at Edward, delivering the final blow for his insult against Amy and me. I intend to claim every penny of compensation for emotional distress and child support. If he can't pay, I'll pursue him relentlessly, prepared to chase him to the ends of the earth. Edward and his mistress shrieked and fled, while the realtor, who witnessed the entire scene, thanked me with a posture suggesting a burden lifted from his back. No, I should be the one apologizing for the trouble I've caused, I replied, feeling uneasy about staying any longer. I took Amy's hand and we headed home. Mom, that was so cool. Thank you for standing up for me, Amy expressed, a smile gracing her face. I vowed to protect her for the rest of my life. Later on, I was able to divorce Edward without any issues, ending the long-suffering marriage surprisingly easily. It made me wonder why I endured everything until now. It appeared Edward had invested heavily in his affair, leading him to borrow money from somewhere. His mistress left him, citing an inability to be with such a financially troubled man. Misfortunes converged as Edward's company downsized due to sales decline from material shortages. Working in the factory, Edward was among the first to be laid off. While inconvenient, it's hard to believe he was laid off for no reason. The company likely let go of underperforming or poorly behaved employees first. Given Edward's attitude at home, it's plausible he displayed a similar demeanor at work. Now unemployed and abandoned by his lover and wife, Edward struggles with part-time jobs and lacks the energy to seek full-time employment. It must feel bleak for him, but there's no room for sympathy. Despite donating a part of my kidney to him, he mocked me, and karma seems to have caught up. Edward should focus on working hard to pay off his debts. As for me, I turned to illustration work, supported by the assets inherited from my in-laws. Amy's compliment about my drawing skills kick-started my career. Though orders are still limited, clients praise my meticulous and skillful work. I plan to expand my clientele and work diligently to raise Amy properly.